Hello and welcome to the Sexient Being sessions. Today we're talking about unleashing love. So, if you want to discover how to shift your focus from external connections to build a profound relationship within yourself, explore the power of embracing all parts of your being through healing your trauma, breaking free of past patterns and trauma bonded cycles, uncovering the secrets of finding love and partnership you truly desire through being willing to take the risk and getting comfortable being uncomfortable, then you have come to the right place. So get ready for a playful journey of self discovery, magnetic attraction, and soul mate connections. So, I am Alix Pruett, a certified sex, love, and relationship coach with a BDSM and kink focus. I work with men, women, and couples plus who want to transform their old patterns, pain, and beliefs so they can create thriving relationships that are deeply connected, playful, and fulfilling within themselves and with others. So, the topic for today is around like creating soulmate partnership. And through my own journey, one of the biggest things I have found is that for a very long time, I was doing that relying on people outside of me to fulfill that role. And one place I ended up finding a drastically different shift was when I brought the focus to being my own best soulmate partner first, my own best lover, my own greatest dom, for the folks who are in the BDSM and kink communities. And before that, I tended to fall into five major pitfalls or traps for myself. And I want to talk a little bit about what those can look like first. And if you're noticing these patterns within yourself or these behavior sets or these mentalities, then like don't be too hard on yourself. It is something that our society, what's modeled for us through childhood, like deeply ingrains in our system as just the way things are. But I do want to give you a little bit of hope and like encouragement that there is a different path you can take so that you can have those soulmate partnerships. You can have these deep, profound, playful, mind blowing experiences in your relationships. But where it starts is within you first. So let's talk a little bit about these pitfalls. The first one is focusing on the other person too much. And this can show up in a myriad of ways. So, one really great example of this is let's say you're even going on a first date with another person. How much of the time are you focused on, oh, are they going to like me? And then you're bringing the focus to like are they going to like me, but it's basing whether they like you or not as the foundation of like if this was even a good date. My question for you, how much do you actually like them? How much do you like who you're able to be when you're around them versus adding your value to their perspective of you? So this brings us into the second pitfall, which is changing who you are for the other person. Not necessarily because like that makes you a better person who you love more, but with this kind of like shadowy and it can be very subconscious and unconscious undertone of you're changing who you are, the ways you behave, even maybe the things you like. So maybe you really like anime. So I've had relationships where I have done this. I really loved watching anime, and in the relationship, because my partner had expressed at some point in time that they didn't like anime and they thought it was kind of dumb, I actually stopped watching anime when I was in the relationship with them. And that didn't just become like when I was around them. Eventually, it became I stopped watching it altogether. Um, but that's a little way that somebody can end up like shifting who they are, what the things are they like. We do this in all sorts of ways, and a lot of it can be that we're scared if we express these parts of ourselves, if we let those parts of ourselves be known, that this person's going to reject us. I'm not going to say that that person may not reject you. I also want to give you the illumination, the awakening, the enlightenment that maybe that person doesn't like it, like, and that's okay. They don't have to like it, but it doesn't mean that you have to change who you are at your core in those ways. If that's something you really enjoy, is fulfilling for you, like allows you to have certain expressions of who you are, then I highly recommend, like, please don't shut that down about yourself. Like, be able to connect with those spaces that purely bring you joy, that you don't have to dismiss because you're scared your partner's not going to like it. And that comes across the board in so many areas. It can come across in the types of foods you enjoy eating, right? It can come across the types of shows or movies or books, audiobooks, radio programs, places you really enjoy going and getting to experience, going out to certain events with friends. I will say that one form of like really toxic relationships I have been in, and I've seen many examples of, not only like in personal relationships with other friends, but displayed in like movies and TV shows, is where like somebody feels jealous or uncomfortable that their partner is hanging out with a guy friend or a different group of friends. And so that person will end up weaning out and not interacting with those people at all over time. And in very drastic extremes, like that can be a type of isolation and a very toxic trait amongst partners. On the flip side of it, if you're really finding that you don't like your partner hanging out with certain people, like take a look within yourself at what's coming up. Is there jealousy there? Is there lack? What is that for you, versus automatically projecting that it's something harmful that they're doing to themselves or to the relationship necessarily. Um, the second piece here is blaming yourself or others. So I had this really big pattern when I would get out of my relationships with, where like, and I may have been cheated on, I may have been had all the rights to like be a victim in those spaces. I mean, I definitely dealt with spaces of emotional and mental abuse on many levels. The thing was, in that, like, I also decided to stay in those places. So, yes, I could just blame that my partner was an asshole, right? The shift I've taken for myself now is they have their trauma, because usually a lot of the ways that we end up hurting one another comes from spaces of trauma. Hurt people. In that, I chose to stay there, to put myself in those situations, to not take a step back from the relationship sooner. Again, I had all my very unconscious reasons, my own trauma, my own patterns that had me stay there and do those things. But there's taking a level of accountability and responsibility. And to me, this space of coming to deep soulmate connection, deep soulmate partnership within yourself and with others is about taking radical responsibility and radical ownership and stepping back into your power as an individual for the life you lead and even the relationships that you decide to stay in or to leave. The next piece is loving someone for their potential. I was definitely a master of this. I would find people who were in quite wounded states, at least for a handful of the relationships that I went through. And because they talk about all these big dreams they had and all these ambitions that they had, I would take that as, oh, this is the person they're becoming. It may have not been the person they were showing they were at that moment. And this can be a big like distinction and like a no-go point for me anymore on relationships is, can I love the person for where they are and who they are right now? If I can't do that thing, if I need them to be something else for me to genuinely love them, then that is not a person that I should be staying in a relationship with. There's no problem with talking about building a future together by any means. It's something that is very normal, and especially in establishing relationships, like you want to make sure that like where you're going on a path is aligned with another person, but don't just base you loving them, you caring about them on the potential of who they're going to be. Also, if you are with a partner and they are constantly like having you feel like you're not good enough because you're not doing enough exactly as you are right now, that may be another good sign that this may not be the correct relationship for you at this time. And it's a little insight from my personal experience and studies. And that's, love who you are right now, love who you're with right now as they are. And if you can't do that, there could be some good signs there that the relationship is misaligned or needs to find a better balance. And that's conversations within a relationship. All right. The last pitfall, and they all come together typically, is basing your value on others. So a great example of this comes down to body image. So a lot of people will end up only finding value in their body when they're getting compliments or validation from people outside themselves. So they may look in a mirror themselves and they don't like what they see. That first like impulse may be self-criticism, self-doubt, judgment, right? Well, then they get with a partner, or let's say they're going on a whole bunch of dates, they're getting all this positive validation that they're beautiful or sexy or absolutely gorgeous, that their body's perfect, whatever it may be. And when it comes down to it, let's say that relationship ends. Let's say whatever the source of that validation for our system is goes away, right? Let's say you stop dating. So now you're not constantly getting input from this variety of other individuals. The dating relationship you were in ends, or even your marriage relationship ends, and you don't have this source from outside of yourself giving you that validation. Well, what ends up happening is now you fall back into your old patterns. You start blaming yourself that you weren't good enough, you weren't attractive enough, you weren't thin enough, you weren't curvy enough, you weren't sexy enough, you didn't have enough muscles, whatever it may be, because you are literally placing your value on the perspective of people outside of you. And believe me, I did this for years. I've actually had relationships where I asked the other person if they could stop making comments on my physical body, because I was currently going through a phase where I was recognizing whether it was positive or negative aspects or ideas or views of what my body was, no matter when I was getting input from the outside, it it kind of like had my system feel a little bit fried and disjointed, and had me falling back into this old pattern of needing to place my value on what other people thought of me. And that was part of my own self journey. It was yes, let's just leave it there for now. I lost my train of thought a little bit. But a lot of this comes back to finding value in yourself, right? Coming back into your own power, your own love of yourself, so that you just know you are innately worthy of having these things. Because one little secret I've ended up finding through my relationship experience is that when we place that these validations need to come from outside of us, it can put us in this mode where we feel very like needy, greedy, wanty. And that it has to be somebody, something outside of us that fulfills that for us. And when we have that need, that greed, that wanting for somebody fulfilling it from outside of us, I don't know if it's an vibration, it's an energy, it's an air, an attitude, a mentality, but it ends up feeling like a pressure for other people and can actually push them away. There may be a little while where they're willing to fulfill that, but ultimately it just ends up feeling like this space of like constantly being drawn from or taken from rather than it being as much of a relationship and a two-way street. And it's one of the things that I find really fascinating with relationships is a lot of the way they get modeled and modeled with very toxic traits is that they are more of a one-way street. And the idea with the two-way street is that it's more of that equal relationship of give and take. There's reciprocity within your relationship. And maybe that's not 100% equal all the time, but the majority of the time it is. There's always going to be imbalances. One person has work stress or family or other friendship stresses come up, maybe financial stress come up, and you need to support them a little bit more. On the reverse side of that, would they be willing to do the same for you? Would they be able to do the same for you? And that's really what brings it back to this two-way street. But the core foundation of any of this, from what I have learned, from what I have experienced, from what I have studied and researched, is coming back to providing it for yourself first. And there's so many spaces in life where this gets so muddled. I actually had a friend reach out the other day and they sent a like meme type thing to a group chat we have with our friends, and they were apologizing, or the meme was apologizing for them like having had their like proverbial shit come up in life and that they couldn't be there to support their other friends. Now, while this can be valuable, my first thought isn't that that friend had to be supporting me if they were going through their own chaotic shit. My first thought is like, you put on your own oxygen mask first. Like, if you can't take care of you, if you aren't loving you first, then you're not actually able to provide that support to other people. You're not actually able to provide that love to other people. And if you are providing that to them and you're not having your own bucket refilled over time, you can go into burnout. Like you will be functioning off of empty. You're going to be more likely to get triggered, to start fights in argument or in relationships, to feel unhappy and unfulfilled in those spaces. And that's where it ends up coming in that like certain relationships can feel very exhausting or very draining because there's not the reciprocal exchange. It's a lot of one person giving, one person receiving. And when that becomes the normal, it just creates an imbalance. And this is about creating balanced relationships. So, how do we start doing this? Well, one, I want to say that if you are in these relationship patterns, like they probably aren't fulfilling you in the ways you want or need to be fulfilled within your relationships. There's all of society telling you, including Disney, thank you, Disney, that when you reach a certain point, then you just hit your happily ever after. And if you like work and you struggle hard enough, that like you're going to hit that, right? But it places all the value on the things outside of us and our value, again, on those things outside of us. And that's what we're wanting to step away from. So you're wanting to create these soulmate connections, and that's going to start with you doing it within yourself first. And that can be really uncomfortable. I know for me, one big thing I did for a long time was literally all my focus was on the relationships outside of me. It didn't matter if it was my romantic or sexual partnerships. It didn't matter if it was my work or family dynamics. Like, if those people were happy, then I could be happy. The more likely reality that I ended up coming across, though, is that when I am happy, that feeds down to the other people around me. And a really great example of this came down to one of my longest term relationships. And I will personally admit that in this relationship, I had pretty much given up on having my partner be any sort of support at all. They didn't need to provide for me, they didn't need to protect me, they didn't need to really give back in any sort of way. And like I had gotten messaging as a teenage girl from my father, which I know his heart was in the best of places, to never be dependent on a man. And with that message, my little teenage brain, more child-based brain, skewed it to mean that as long as I could support myself, then everything was fine and I could just go support other people. And so I found myself in this sort of repeated pattern that lasted in through this last relationship I'm referencing, of being the primary provider. Like I would constantly find myself in caretaker relationships where I was much more like the mother to my partners than an actual partner. And it doesn't surprise me, especially in that last relationship, that our sex life completely got obliterated. Um, that's who, I mean, there is the kink of incest and mother child roles or father child roles or sibling. But outside of that, for the most part, like incestuous roles, like hit an ick button for a lot of people, and especially women when it comes to sexuality. There's some evolutionary studies I came across in the past where actually females have a much higher aversion to that ick factor of incest than males of the human species do. Sidetrack on that note. um, but that's our sex life was almost completely wiped out. That's, I think it was a 3-year relationship, and there was a point in there where there was over 7 months straight where we were not sexually intimate and were barely touching at all. And for me, that's my love language, if you want to call it that, is touch. Like physical touch, even if it's non-sexual, is highly important. And it was something that was severely missing in that relationship. But it ended up falling apart. And as I watched it fall apart, I remember feeling so very confused because I had given this person everything they said they wanted. When it came to our wedding ceremony, like I hadn't wanted a big ceremony. They had. I put it all together. I literally like handmade the bouquets out of paper flowers, arranged all the things for caterers, for wedding attire, like literally did all the things to make this dream come true, this fantasy come true, and they weren't happy. I I supplied them like that's I paid financially for like for where we were living, for all the food, for any amenities we had with the house, things like that. And they weren't happy. I left them room to follow their dreams and aspirations. And there was even a point in this where, like, I actually did have to draw a boundary because I wasn't able to transport them to something myself. And I was like, but you can take a city bus or like we can figure out something else. And they decided to not follow through with it. And that's fine for their choice. But even that came back to I told them they couldn't follow through with this dream or aspiration that they wanted to pursue. I never said anything to that point. That's the message they got out of it for sure. But in that, they still weren't happy no matter what I did, even though, like, based on the input of information they were giving me for all the things they wanted, they still just were never happy. And that wasn't on me to make them happy. That person likely isn't going to be happy until they learn to find happiness within themselves. But the same goes for me, right? Like, no matter how hard I tried with this world outside of me, it didn't matter. Like, I couldn't make anybody else happy, right? We actually don't have much of any control over anyone else's emotions. Like, yes, are there things we can do that we know are going to be their preference? Of course. Are there things we could do that we know they may be more averse to? Of course. There are things you generally pick up on in being an empathetic being, which, unless you are lacking certain mirror neurons in your nervous system, like you have an empathetic side, like you know how to read people, whether you're consciously doing it or not, but we don't actually have any control over how other people feel. And so that's where, if you can bring yourself to this very loving space for you, this very kind and compassionate space for you, then it's going to create a world of difference. And it's kind of like throwing a pebble into a pond, and that ripples out. And if you imagine yourself as the pebble, like that spreads out into the waters that surround you. So, how do we do this? You have likely spent a large majority of your life basing your value on how much other people love you, how attractive or good enough or smart or anything else the world outside of you has told you you are. That first step is getting comfortable, being uncomfortable with showing yourself that love. And that can feel really uncomfortable. I'm not going to deny that. I've gone through those spaces of like, is this really okay? Because I based so much of my value on those people outside of me. And I can tell you, especially if you're going through the end of a relationship and it's not, if it's messy, if it's chaotic, if the other person, like who used to tell you all the very loving things, is now telling you all the exact opposites, right? So they used to tell you how much they loved your voice, and now they're telling you it is the most wretched sound they have ever heard in their life. Like, that's going to feel heartbreaking, again, because you've been placing your value outside of yourself. It's also going to feel confusing because those are two very conflicting views coming out of the same person. I want to invite you again, if you're noticing like those conflicting views coming out of the same person, to realize that says much more about them than it says anything about you. So, first little like personal mantra is get comfortable being uncomfortable. The second one is to start learning that other people's actions, other people's reactions, the things people like say and then don't follow through on, their inactions, all say way more about them than they say anything about you. So stop taking it personally because we're all really fucking selfish in so many ways and on a very unconscious level, so we don't realize it. But those those subconscious projections can can be really beautiful keys when you start bringing awareness to that they are a projection onto the world. The that last piece is be willing to take the risk. So when you've been in these sorts of relationship dynamics and patterns, you've gotten comfortable with the space you're in. And when you're willing to take that risk, it's to step outside of your normal, automated living reality. Because I can guarantee, like, as uncomfortable or scary as it may seem to start stepping outside of that reality that you've probably had, again, for many years, maybe your lifetime so far, it's not going to feel comfortable, but I guarantee when you start looking back at what you have been through, you'll realize how fucking uncomfortable, painful, and scary the space you were actually was. And that while the uncomfortable feeling of the unknown for the experiences you haven't had of this new shift in mentality, shift in perspective, shift in the way of your being, while those seem uncomfortable because it's unknown, that it's a different kind of discomfort. And we want to start moving into that discomfort of the unknown, right? It's kind of like I don't know if you've ever taken like tinted glasses, right? It's one of my favorite references is you're shifting the lens of how you look at the world. And you can imagine that you were wearing blue tinted glasses before, and now you're either taking them off or you're changing them to a completely different color because there are infinite possibilities within the world. If anything, this lifetime has taught me, and through the work I've done, it is that there are infinite ways to look at a situation. I think it came after the World Trade Towers went down at 9/11 is you started getting all these different perspectives. So you have the idea that, let's say, 1,000 people go and experience and see the exact same event. Each one will have their own version of a story for what happened in that space. Each one had different details that stood out to them, different feelings and emotions or sensations that came up in their body, different lenses that they're looking at the world with to tell their version of the story. And that's the beautiful thing about experience is you're now getting to tell that story, but a lot of the time we don't even notice our own lenses, and especially when it comes to the stories about us being in relationships, whether that's partnered relationships, work relationships, when we're not taking our 100% responsibility and either taking on too much or asking others to take on more than is actually theirs, we're falling in kind of this skewed lens. Now I'm curious how many people this is resonating for, what your biggest takeaways have been so far, and if this does click for you, like, comment down below what is resonating, what's coming up for you. Also, remember, if you've seen yourself in any of these reflections for what we've been talking about so far, like, these are normal things that we get trained and patterned into for how we show up to partnerships. And that's okay. But what we're doing here is bringing a consciousness, an awareness to what those patterns may have been in the past so that we can shift, so that you can actually start calling in fulfilling, highly magnetic, playful, and deeply connected relationships into your life. So let's go a little bit into these pitfalls and the traps, but how, and more specifically, how you avoid those pitfalls or traps. Now, I can say if you have had these as long-standing patterns, then it is very likely that at some point in time, that pattern is going to pop up again. The way I like to think about it is kind of like an old path. So if you imagine that, like, you're in the woods and you've been consistently walking down the same trail in the woods over and over for years, like, that trail is really fucking well worn. There's no grass that grows in the trail, like the path is kind of like dug down into the dirt, and as you look out ahead, you can actually, like, see the trail out ahead of you. Even, like, if you're looking over the bushes and stuff a little bit, like, you can see kind of where that dip is for everything. What you're going to be doing now is creating a whole new trail. So you can actually imagine this, like, you're going in to this internal proverbial forest within yourself, and you're going to be taking a machete or whatever tools you have and cutting a new trail. So you're going to be cutting through the brush and everything like that, and it's going to feel like hard and uncomfortable and even potentially risky at times. If you need to slow down, that's okay. Let yourself slow down. But what ends up happening is you're now cutting this new trail. And this path isn't as well worn. Like, keep that in mind. You are creating a new path for yourself. Well, you're going to start taking this path regularly on a conscious choice. Like, you're going to come to this now split in the trailhead. And now you're going to be taking the new path by a conscious decision. There's every once in a while you may fall back into your automatic mode, and the old path is easier for you to see because that was your path for so many years. And so you may end up noticing, oh, I'm going down this path again. I don't want to be going down that one. And it's giving yourself the recognition that, like, as you go through this change, as you go through this shift, like, you're having to make a conscious choice rather than falling back into the old path of your default mode. The nice thing is, the more you start taking this trail, the new path that you've been forming, the more overgrown the old path is going to get. The more the shrubbery is going to grow in, the more the rain's going to hit it, and where it's kind of dug down in the dirt, right? The soil is going to get pushed back over, or new rocks, or it'll fill in with leaf debris, however you want to see it, right? but the more that'll get filled in over time. And eventually, you will get to a point where you don't even recognize that old path. It's no longer an option. And your new path is nice and worn because you've been making, again, this conscious choice, this aware choice that, oh, now we're taking the right path. When these sensations, when these sorts of emotions, when these sorts of triggers come up, I'm going to take the right hand path instead. And you can actually, like I've been describing this as a path through the forest. This is sort of the thing that actually is happening in your brain, but with your neural networks. And I know for a long time in the world of science, they actually did not think that new neural networks formed after, I believe, around the age of 25. But neuroplasticity is a thing. And thankfully, with all the psychedelic research coming out, they're getting a greater awareness in different realms of science to support that no, you can actually change your neural networks even past the age of 25. They are not just set in stone for what they were up until that point. Like you can change, you can adapt, you can grow, you can learn. One of the best ways in my personal experience, and again, a lot of the research I've done into consciousness and the neurobiology of transformation, is by continuing to learn and get curious. One of the top things you can start getting curious about is yourself. Because while most of us think that like we just know who we are, and that can be accurate, you may know who you are in this moment, there's a whole lot of things that have gone on in your life to make you the person you are today. There's going to be a whole lot more that comes in and makes you the person that you are 5 years from now. And you are an ever growing, ever changing, ever expanding being who has, again, these unlimited and infinite capabilities of the different paths and ways you can be, what you can accomplish, what you can achieve, how fulfilled you can be, how much joy, how much bliss, how much ecstasy, all the things that you can feel are without it actually having to relate to anything outside of you. It's actually one of my favorite things from my adventures and journeys in breath work. I don't know how many people know much about breath work. Most people know breath work from the idea of meditation, which meditation is a form of breath work, at least as far as meditative breath. It's normally a slower than normal breathing rate. There's a variety of those things, but one thing I find amazing from what I've gotten to learn with the breathwork community is a lot of the providers that I've taken courses from had actually been very highly linked with the psychedelic movements that were happening back in the 60s. And so they've tried a variety of psychedelics like DMT, LSD, psilocybin, different ayahuasca ceremonies, the whole gamut. Well, in that, a lot of these now breathwork providers actually moved away from using psychedelics because they could hit very similar states of like euphoria, connectedness. There's another term from a book I've been listening to recently called exodus, and it's a flow state that humans can tend to experience through dance, through I think he talks a lot about SEAL Team 6 and how they kind of go into this like group think mentality when they're out working in the fields. But it's an ability to connect to those states only using the breath. And so while most of the time people only have had those experiences when they are actively taking drugs or working with a group of people, all these other things, you can actually reach those states literally by only your breathing and fluctuating the different breathing rates and allowing yourself to be in this place of surrender during those experiences. So it brings around the concept that anything you feel inside of you, like while there are certain things in the world outside of you that can trigger that feeling, like it exists inside of you because it's already a part of you. And this same sort of thing can come down in what shows up as trauma bonds in our relationships with other people. And how this ends up coming across is that like there are certain triggers that'll pop up, like that's you can't quite put your finger on why you're so attracted to this one person. You may even have people asking you like, well, but why that person? And you can't quite give an answer, and maybe it comes down to well it's just our connection. But there's something about your connection, the things you feel, what you're experiencing in your body when you're with that person, that all compile to tell you, I'm attracted to this person in particular. And the thing that we can get stuck on is that we're attracted to that one person, and so it has to be them, right? And ultimately, they're actually just a reflection of something getting triggered inside of us that we enjoy feeling. Now, where this can come down to a lot of trauma bonding is that there can be a familiarity that comes along with those relationships. Like there can be this sense of safety because it feels familiar, especially when you meet somebody like right off the bat and you're like, man, I feel like I've known you for years when you literally just met. And a lot of that familiarity comes down to things that came up in our childhood, relationships that we experienced in our childhood, whether that be with parents, siblings, other close relatives, people we were around on a regular basis. And what can end up happening is like, yes, where they trigger those happy, fulfilling, like connected feelings we got to experience in childhood with our family and friends or peers at that point in time, there's usually the toxic traits at the same time. And this is more what our subconscious can end up like inadvertently targeting at. That's where if you've been in a string of toxic relationships, or you're currently in a relationship and you're like, man, this feels so familiar. Like, why do I keep having this come up in my partnered relationships, in my sexual relationships, in my dating experience? That can be because there's something like inadvertently attracting you, again, a very subconscious level, to these cues that this other person gives off by little things in their behavior, by ways they treat you, by little things they say. And then it triggers, oh, I'm attracted to them. And there's an excitement there. Like your subconscious actually wants to find this like wholeness, this healing, this deep level of connection. And again, it's placing that value on it having to come from somebody outside of you. Now, I will personally admit, like, I am conscious of this, right? I still have this come up, and I've actually gone kind of like the toxic road with it at certain points in time in dating relationships, being like, oh, I notice they're triggering this thing that wants to heal. But then I continue to proceed with that relationship rather than doing my own inner work. And it's actually interesting because it gave kind of like a tenfold reflection of the negative that I wasn't wanting to experience. And for some reason, I thought I had to stay in it to gain whatever my lesson was. Obviously, I did because I had to see that the experience was going to be that tenfold of I don't want to feel this. What the fuck am I doing to myself? Um, but in that, you can also start learning to take that as the earlier cues of maybe this relationship just isn't right for me. And that's okay too. So, as you're going through this, again, it's about coming back to finding your own self-worth, your own self-love, and then allowing whatever you share with the world and your relationships around you to be this overflow of abundance. It's kind of like if you, like, let's say you're working a minimum wage job, you're barely scraping by from week to week or paycheck to paycheck. And now you have somebody come in and like you barely feel like you have enough to support yourself. And now they're asking you to give them a whole bunch of money and like you just don't have it. And that's viable. Like again, putting on our own oxygen mask first. Like you have to be able to support yourself first versus let's say you now all of a sudden started getting $1 million every week or every month. At that point, it's much easier to give away money, especially like if you knew that you were just going to have that level of abundance, that level of resource for yourself to be able to keep giving and giving. And that's what we want to bring it back to, but with this abundance of self-love, abundance of your own value. And then you're just going to keep doing that over and over and over again. And there's, again, at points, you're going to notice, like, oh, like I'm taking my old path where you're allowing your value to be placed on things outside of you. And again, then you get to take the opportunity to be like, nope, I'm going to go back and take this new path I've been carving out. And that's okay. That is a space to be very kind with yourself and compassionate with yourself to know that, like, yeah, every once in a while I'm going to get in auto mode and I'm not going to be thinking about what I'm doing. And it's okay that I fell back in my old default. Kind, compassionate. Like, you don't have to be highly critical and judgmental of yourself. Believe me, my inner critic still likes to pop up. And it's interesting to just sit with her and notice all the things she has to say at times. But we can start delineating these as different parts or aspects of ourselves and create this integration within our own system versus now needing to change who we are to fulfill what other people think we should be. We can create, again, this acceptance of self love and love in ourselves and then share it from there. So I think that wraps things up for today. I would love to hear what your biggest takeaway was from this podcast. What do you want to start carving out as a new path in your life for how you're going to approach your relationship with yourself or your relationship with others? And if you're interested in working with me, then go ahead, pop into the link that's in the description or on the About page of YouTube. And from there, you can either join one of the email lists or go check out the website. On the website, especially related to this topic, there is an amazing program called Conscious as Fuck Dating. And this is aimed at creating a very solid foundation of self love, getting to identify your inner critic your inner child, like bring this loving, compassionate presence to them, to yourself first. And then again, have it being this overflow of abundance that you're able to share with the world and in your relationships. So you can actually attract relationships off of just being who you are, being confident, being loving in who you are. And then to me, like once I've been able to tap into that, and I've gotten to see it with my client work as well, then it's so much easier to just know when you're in the right relationship with the right person, to be able to let go of the relationships that really aren't serving for you and know that that is for your own best good and probably the other person's own best good. So until next time, have a good one.